What's going on, everybody? This is the Blockchain Backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we're going to be taking a peek over here at the Bitcoin price chart and also talking about the altcoin market, including looking at some long-term structures happening over here on altcoins that we actually did see back there in 2020 and 2021. Shortly after all of this stuff played out, like we've been comparing here in 2023 back to 2020, which, as we know, we got the big breakout in here. The stock market ended up setting a new all-time high. What did we get last week? We got the Dow to set a new all-time high. So we'll talk about, what's going on with Bitcoin. We'll talk about some of the stuff going on with these longer structures happening here in the altcoin market. And then throughout it all, we'll integrate in there what's going on over there in the stock market, what's happening right now, the narrative being put out there, what's going to happen with rate cuts and how that's supposed to be super bullish for the market. Or is it? We'll just kind of paint a bigger picture of what we're looking like as we're getting ready to head into the end of the year and head into the start of the next year and potentially have a couple of months of excitement ahead of us. The first thing is, I don't think there's a whole lot of new things to say about Bitcoin besides the things that we've talked about in just kind of understanding how we've gotten to where we are. We all know it, right? The retail sector got completely washed out in here. They got washed out just like they did back in 2020. Everybody looking for 23, 20, 16, 12K. It's the same story of what happened in 2020 for those who weren't here. Everybody looking for 6K, 4K, 3K, new lows. It didn't matter. Expecting, post-traumatic stress to happen here after we had just gone through C19 several months prior, about 6 months prior to that. Kind of like this, we had just gone through FTX collapse like 8 months prior to this. The market breaks out. It just continues this grind. Happening in here. And then what do we get? We get stock market setting a new all-time high for the Dow Jones over here. We get stock market setting a new all-time over here for the Dow Jones. And even if we had, something like this continuing to go on in here, right? It's kind of just, that's the, even if it did, like if you just pretended that's the story that's next, that is still just a lot of washing machine ahead in the next couple of months here for Bitcoin, right? Even if that trend continues up, there's still going to be more washing machining happening in here, right? It gets up to what, 50K, 52, gets like 702 or 618 retracement. Still lots of washing machine, even if that's what's in your cards, right? Of course, this is still up in the air. You know that we've followed 2014 through 2016 with remarkable precision in regards to timing of when events have occurred over here on Bitcoin. Still continuing to break at all these levels. This is 299 days after the peak. This is 699 days. And then we still leave this one at the same time too, right? And so, it was around this time in here that big wash back to $32,000 or $30,000 happened in here for something similar like that. So we're kind of at that time where that occurred in 2016. So, we can beat that drum over and over again of saying, hey, look, everything's following along. The timetables are online, right? You got the Dow hitting the all-time high, the exact same behavior of 2020, and then at the same time have the oxymoron approach, which is the polar opposite. Say, yeah, but at the same time, this is also exactly when it went flushing right back down to 30 to 32K, right? Either way, I've presented that, my thoughts on Bitcoin to get into a retrace. Now that we've gotten up in here, it's just where it gets way more complicated. We got back into the April levels. It's been the struggle area for a lot of the market. My thoughts are not that, Bitcoin is breaking up and surging into all-time highs and ETF, and it's going to be absolutely epic. I think, the more likely thing is that there is distribution happening in here, and it's just going to see how much supply comes into the market. That's also what is happening in here. This is distribution, and then eventually it gets strong enough to break through that level of distribution, and the demand outweighed the amount of sellers, but it did have to slow down as supply entered into the market. So that even if this does continue following 2020, there's still more supply entering into the market. And like one of the things I've shown over there on Glassnode is the addresses with greater than 10 Bitcoin in their wallets. They were a very clear signal back then in 2020 and 2021 that the peak was coming in. They were the ones that were distributing the larger wallets saying, you know what, all of the retail, all you laser eyes and diamond hands, you're more than welcome to take our Bitcoin off of us. But notice that they didn't start distributing until Bitcoin really got into its all-time high. One of the things we talked a lot about with like Bitcoin only going into a retrace rather than going into all-time highs is keeping an eye on these wallets too. And as we could see, look, you watch what happens in here, right? So we hit this peak. They don't ever really strongly accumulate back in here. You get way back up to the new all-time high. They're not convinced. They're not reaccumulating, right? They're still distributing. When do they finally go? They finally go here. At this moment right here, they go into full-blown accumulation happening in this moment. FTX collapse, boom, we'll take it all. And look at that. They go all the way back to having the supply that they had prior to the breakout into the all-time highs they distributed. So they knew to buy all of this whole period in here where retail's screaming for 12K from June all the way till January. They were the ones to pick it all up off the floor. And then they continue grinding. But now suddenly they're starting to distribute again. They're starting to unload a little bit. And like you kind of think about it where you're at right in here, we're talking all about this stuff. All of this right in here comes from this moment right in here. And what they're starting to do is they're distributing early. All the on-chain guys who pointed to this stuff back in 2021, 2022, it's like, oh yeah, these were signs. They won't point to this. You will not find those on-chain guys saying, hey, how about this one right here? But that's an element to keep an eye on, right? They are distributing into it. So to think that there's not, supply entering into the market, that, this is distribution happening in here, right? There's going to be, even if this thing keeps marching up in here, we're seeing the distribution and we see them distributing these coins back into the market in here. The question just becomes of whether or not, does it have to spend a long duration amount of time in here to be able to then work its way out? Or is this distribution coming in strong enough and boom, it whips itself back, and then all the on-chain guys look back with hindsight and say, oh yeah, I guess we could see it happening in there, but I was really focused on the Bitcoin ETF. That's the big challenge. But my thoughts are that, regardless of, Bitcoin, when we look at things just like in a bigger perspective, like when it comes to the stock market, of course, right? Like this is the big news, right? You get the new all-time high. We've spent a year and a half talking about the Dow Jones. While it was the most Googled recession in all time, right? How will a top look for the Dow Jones? Whether it would just be a retracement, or will it be the same distribution that we saw over there for like Bitcoin and for Ethereum back in 2021? As we know, this is the roaring 20s bubble that was printed in the United States stock market, not altered for size. It actually just legitimately fits into our Fibonacci extension starting from the bottom, that it actually legitimately gets to a 4.236 extension. But we've seen things like this that we've tracked. I've written newsletters about this over the past months on the NDXT, the NASDAQ 100 technology sector, right? And studying what distributions look like, where you could still get all-time highs in these things, but you're still in distribution. You're still in the top of a market cycle. But what ends up happening in these phases, and just reflect back to living what it was like back in late 2021, October and November, that, these all-time highs certainly meant that we were going to 100K, right? But that it was a distribution. As we talk about it in this manner right now, it will uncertainly be considered wrong and dumb. But that idea was also considered dumb and silly back in 2021, that's what the distribution in the top of Bitcoin would end up looking like. And so, of course, we've been monitoring this and watching this, and, what would happen in a moment like this in the stock market, in which we would see, extreme euphoria and extreme excitement and extreme risk taking and extreme perceptions that it is the beginning of an absolute new bull run and incredible excitement. Because the perception is that if we start doing rate cuts right over there, if the Fed starts doing rate cuts, that it's going to be this magical, insane new bull market that is starting for the stock market and starting for all markets. But one of those charts we've compared against all year long has been the great financial crisis, right? We talked about these higher highs and higher lows coming up in here. This obviously being way more bigger highs and bigger lows, right? A little more confusing in there, but still, this is exactly how it worked with rate cuts, right? In that, we had the big range. And then when we went into the pause prior to the great financial crisis, the pause period is where we broke into the high, right? So you've been below this high since January of 2000. You break through it here in October of 2006. So this takes 6 years and 6 months. That's a long time, right? Finally, the Fed goes into pause. The market breaks into the new all-time highs. Then the cuts come, right? Once the first cut happens, boom, you get these little rings, and then everything just completely falls apart. And so it just so happens to be the same exact narrative, right? It's the same story, but it's like retail completely forgets the story of how it all went. And that if we start cutting, then it's good. That means new bull run starts now. Instead, it's the exact same thing, and it's happening to get itself to reach out to a 4.236 extension. And so it'll be the great debate of all time, and until the stock market tops on how high did Bitcoin end up getting. I still don't see it. I don't see how a new all-time high for Bitcoin happens, but I can see excessive euphoria entering into the market. And, so we could look around at lots of different market caps. We got Filecoin here and Ethereum Classic, everybody's favorites, right? But just to kind of show like how things can happen and how they can happen really quickly. Last week, I put out a video and talked about, if we look to the past and we look at how these things can play out, how much time have you bought yourself? If you get yourself through one rate cut, right? Or if you get yourself to like the second rate cut. And if this is kind of the narrative, right? That like we're really breaking out during the pause and then the Fed's going to cut and everybody's euphoric because they think that's really bullish and it's going to start the biggest bull cycle of our whole lives. And euphoria all hits in here in markets. Only for it to then roll over. Well, right, this would have to be like considered like the euphoric blow off top of all markets. And do you have enough time for something like that to happen? Do you have, 3 to 4 months, potentially 5 months for something to be able to happen where, markets can rally up, keep this thing going, keep the charade going for a few months here in broader markets in the stock market before it falls apart, right? And well, if we go based on this stuff and how we've acted with these last rate cuts, it buys you maybe till March, April, or May. Well, it's real interesting to look at it just from these perspectives and looking at these market caps and how they're doing. And that one of the most interesting things to take notice on here is clearly you see the accumulation schematics down here on these are very similar, right? The thing that really just kind of stands out different in here is how when C19 happened, that was the big flush that takes it down to the lows. Instead, it gets drawn out a whole lot longer in here. But one thing that is also really interesting in here for things like Filecoin or things like Ethereum Classic back in here before really the big rampage fired up in here for this market to happen was that this sell-off, this one in particular, right here at this ending, and then the march and the grinds up began. And remember, since then, I think we've seen lots and lots of coins go firing up. I've seen Osmosis go up 550%. You've seen Solana go up like 800 or 900%. You've seen AVAX, Chainlink, ICP. Right? We're just seeing coins after coins after coins after coins firing off, taking out. These whole ranges have been taken out by lots of coins. But like in something like this, what is so interesting to study in here is that particular sell-off that happens right in here that kind of marks the end happening right there. We can put this on the dates here. This one right in here, right? We're like at August 17th, 2023. You go back in here on this one right here. It's like September 4th of 2020. What is so special about those two particular dates and what do they actually mean? Simple. August 17th of 2023, September 4th of 2020. They're literally the same spots in all of this happening in here that we see these final flushes take place in here and the markets start to finally enter into bullish movements happening throughout the market that you've seen in Solana, Chainlink, AVAX, Osmosis, HBAR, everything, right? It's all getting to move after this moment. And like, if you're just looking at Filecoin on how long it's progressed in here on something like that, you just kind of say, well, how far along into this are you? You're probably like right around there. And how much time would that buy you? And like a way to say is that how far are we through that? We could just measure the dates too and just do it the same way, right? Say, hey, here you go. You're right there. You're about 124 days. Here you go. You're about, 122 days, right? Same spot. But how much time was left in it? Like, how long did it take for absolute euphoria to enter into this thing? And you see a 23x in things like Ethereum Classic. How much more time did it take? From this point, it was 118 days. Even if you're right here and you say, you're another 118 days away, where does that get you out to? It gets you to the first half or to the middle of April. Well, you're telling me we could have excessive euphoria, excessive blow-offs? No, of course not. We're too pessimistic right now. We can't do that. But that's how it happened. If you did not know, if you're the person who piled into the market at the top and in Laser and Diamond Hands, it was met with a lot of pessimism leading up to it. And then we go. It was met with a lot of pessimism. What you are seeing now, this is no different than what you saw back in here in regards to sentiment. There is never unwavering confidence that the market is going to keep ripping to the upside until you are finally at the top. But if you're looking at something like that, like it took 118 more days for the market to just completely rip. Where does 118 days from right now put you? It puts you right in that window between the first rate cut and the second, where you peak. which is exactly how all of this played out. That we pause, we break, right? We get a rate cut, everything. Hey, we're great, we're good, and then right? And it doesn't come in just one foul swoop of 117 days of green, right? Even in uptrends, it's still met with more red days than green days. It's just that when the green days happen, you have big ones, like we saw with ICP on Saturday with 60% in a day. But we talk a lot about this stuff happening here in the stock market, and still, this is the biggest thing on my radar. It's like a game of hot potato over here in the stock market, and a lot of misconceptions on what happens when the Fed cuts rates. I mean, even go back to the one prior to that one. You see it, right? Here's the rates cutting, and the stock market falls into the rates cutting, right? But if we go kind of on an idea of just timing, and if you want to integrate in fundamental analysis, and you say like, hey, we're going to use rate cuts and like actually like apply what they have actually meant in the past, and not assume that we start rate cuts and that means we're starting a new bull cycle, incorrect. The rate cuts have signaled we're near the end of times. But can we find anything in these charts acting in here of like what would happen before a euphoric ending came to the market and the amount of time that we have remaining left? If you were to assume that rate cuts will have an impact and have a forward outlook on what would happen in the market, and rate cuts would signal the end of times, which you can still get. You see it here. Like we could still get one more push up, right? We got to push up even when we started cutting rates in 2019 before C19 hit. We got push-ups that happened in there too. But it's shortly after that where like we enter into that window of like, it could all go bad. But does that window there from March 20th through May 5th satisfy the window of time that we have on these charts? And I think it does. And so my outlook for, the coming months is very encouraged, but we're also playing with a different context, potentially, that we've ever had to play with in our entire lives. But there is enough time and structurally and behaviorally where we're acting for this market to ramp up and to give until March, April, or May, a really euphoric time. The problem will be is that we will have a lot of narratives going at the same time. We will have ETF hype. We will have the Fed is cutting and this is the start of a new bubble. We will have a lot of stuff, right? But I really wanted to show you on these charts too, is that just from a time perspective, like if you're just comparing how these things look and then exactly how they behave right in here for that final flush before the market ramps up, this is that, right? That is these two time periods right here. That's that liquidation and that liquidation both happening simultaneously at the same spots within the accumulation schematics that it acts the exact same. And so I'm looking forward to the next several months, but it's still just going to be this big picture of, man, all right, we're entering into this period. I'm not going to buy into the stuff that is totally wrong on saying, hey, the Fed is about to start cutting. That means we're going to be mega bulls when they start cutting. And that's just not what has happened the last three times. The last three times that they started cutting, it was marking what was about to become one of the scariest financial moments. But what happened leading up to that moment was very exciting. And so this is really the picture that I see and the thesis that I have here for the next several months is that we're leading into that moment. We've seen lots of altcoins start to already get a lot of movement, and we're structurally acting like we're already pulling out of those, right? So my thoughts are, we talked a lot about, will 2023 be exciting? And like I said it could come in a very short window. It could come in a short amount of time. And as we have been wrapping up 2023, the last couple of months, there's been lots of excitement that have happened in the market. I mean, look around you. Everybody was like, we're going to a bajillion, right? Look 2 months ago, everybody, we're going to zero. But if we have, 4 months of excitement ahead of us, right? And if we look at just how 2021 behaved, all things were not created equal. The market was very different from what 2017 was. Probably have to expect 2023, 2024 market would be very similar to 2021 in regards to that not everything gets its chance to shine. Some stuff gets completely abandoned. And that was the main focus for me in 2023, once I went to Consensus and spent time talking to Santiment and learning a lot about the development activity and doing lots of case studies and comparing all that. And you guys know the last 3 newsletters have been heavily focused on development activity, percentage drawdowns, and circulating supply inflation. And then finally on Friday, putting out the last one of that particular series in regards to tying them all together and trying to create, based on that data, what would have been the strategy to create the best portfolio of 2020 and 2021. And knowing what we know now, if those same things were applied today, having a case study of what would a portfolio today look like utilizing that same stuff that worked in 2020 and 2021. And so that newsletter got posted there on Friday over there on Substack. There's a link in the description of this video. But we'll be here every day. We'll look for lots of signs throughout the markets. One of those things that I showed in Markets in the Morning today is those things we have seen in the past too, is that where there becomes this time where Bitcoin just completely stalls out and goes into a retracement, but for some reason the altcoin market still has one more big final breath in it. And if that ends up being the case, of course, we'll scream about that at the time too. But it's been a great time to take a look around, understand the things that happened in 2021 that were different from 2017, and look around the market today to see what still has that same look as those things that were successful there in 2021. And that's what I've been spending all year on. Friday, I finished it, wrapped it up and published it. And I'm looking forward to what we have going on for the next few months. Nerve-wracking at the same time, but looking forward to it. Now, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, guys, we have the holidays coming up. We have Christmas. We celebrate Christmas here for those who do too. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to whatever holidays you do celebrate. But I mentioned that I will be on Christmas break from December 21st through 26th. That is Thursday through Tuesday. So I will be here Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but then I will be off starting on Thursday through Tuesday, and I'll be returning the following Wednesday. So there will be 6 days with me off of the YouTube channel and off of Twitter. But otherwise, as we head into the holiday period, things have been looking pretty darn good out there in markets in general. And I think it's going to be a pretty good time to get some rest if the next 3 to 4 months do look like that. So if I don't catch you before then, I want to wish you a happy holidays and a Merry Christmas. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap this thing up. It's a perfect time to check out bcbacker.com to watch the 2 main projects I've been working on in 2023. Building bcbacker.com with over 40 videos and 11 hours of content. And of course, checking out the newsletter over here on Substack. There's links to both of them in the description of this video, to bcbacker.com and to blockchainbacker.substack.com. Otherwise, guys, have a wonderful day, and I'll check in with you again soon. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice, and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.